Hey there. Today I want to talk about something deeply personal and something I know many of you wrestle with every single day, and that's emotional eating. For years, I thought emotional eating was a sign that something was wrong with me. I thought that it meant I was broken or I just didn't have enough willpower. But here's the truth. Emotional eating is a normal human response. You're not broken. And most importantly, emotional eating is something you can change, not by force or restriction, but by understanding and compassion. So, in the third video of the series, How I Lost 100 Pounds at 50 Years Old, I'm going to break down what the emotional eating cycle looks like, why dieting fails to address emotional eating, and how to start uncomplicating emotional eating in your life. So, let's dive right in. Let's talk about the emotional eating cycle first. If this sounds familiar, know that you're not alone. I lived in this cycle for years. It starts with a trigger, something that stirs up an emotion you don't know how to handle or you simply don't want to feel it. Maybe it's stress, loneliness, boredom, or even a celebration. And then comes the craving. You reach for the food, not because you're physically hungry, but because food feels like a quick fix. It offers comfort, maybe a distraction, or just a sense of control in a moment when things feel overwhelming or very out of control. The eating part can almost feel automatic, like you're not really present. And at first, it does seem to help. There's that fleeting relief, that moment where you feel just a little better. But then comes the guilt. You tell yourself that you failed again, that you're out of control, and you promise to get back on track tomorrow. And the cycle starts to begin again. Now, I'm sure that sounds familiar, but here's the thing. Emotional eating isn't about the food. It's about the feeling that you're trying to soothe. And it shows up in different ways for each of us. For me, it was almost always trying to soothe this constant feeling of inadequacy. I didn't think I was good enough in almost every part of my life. And I tried so hard to do everything right all of the time, and I always felt I was coming up short, especially when it came to my weight. My favorite flavor of emotional eating was secret eating. And as long as no one saw me doing it, it was safe. No one could judge me, and I could get some relief from that pressure I put on myself every minute of every single day. So let me just tell you a quick story to kind of demonstrate how this played out for me. My corporate HR job required me to travel quite often, and that meant dinners out with my coworkers or my peers. And I hated those. Talk about feeling judged. So I would always order something that I jokingly call now the shame salad. Now, I ordered a salad because I was really overweight and I really wanted those people that I believed were judging me to know that I knew I was overweight. But when I got back to the hotel, when I was alone and no one could see me, I ordered room service. A full meal, desserts, sometimes even an appetizer. It felt good, almost a little rebellious in the moment to say, I'll be damned if I'm going to eat another salad. I'm going to eat exactly what I want. And that soothed that emotion. I could eat without judgment. Nobody was looking. And it felt really good until about halfway through the meal. That's when I started to feel guilty. And then I'd start to think, oh, you might as well finish it. You've gone this far. And it just started the whole cycle over again. And the very next day, I was back on my strict diet. But this is where dieting completely misses the mark and why dieting is actually failing emotional eaters. You may have heard me say that failing to address emotional eating is the biggest flaw of almost all diets. Diets treat food as the problem, telling you that you need to cut your calories, avoid carbs, or follow a whole list of rigid rules. But they completely ignore the why behind emotional eating. And here's the kicker. The very nature of dieting actually makes emotional eating worse. When you're on a diet, you're restricting what you can eat. You're fighting against cravings, you're trying to resist the forbidden foods, and you're using sheer willpower to stay on plan. But what happens when emotions hit? When you have a bad day, when someone criticizes or judges you, or when you're just overwhelmed with living life? Those foods you've been trying so hard to avoid become even more tempting. And when you do give in, the guilt's magnified because you've broken the rules of the diet. So you try harder. You tighten the rules, you restrict even more, you get more militant, and you promise yourself you're going to be perfect next time. and the cycle just keeps spinning. The truth is, dieting is just a band-aid. It might help you lose some weight temporarily, but it doesn't address the root cause of emotional eating. And that's why it never works long term. And it's why most of us who lose weight dieting gain everything back plus some. So the turning point of uncomplicating emotional eating happened when I decided to stop treating emotional eating like a willpower problem and started treating it like what it really was, an emotional problem. And here's how I began to do it. Number one, I let go of the food rules. I stopped dieting. Now, I did a whole video on this, so definitely go back and watch that one if you haven't already. But when I stopped dieting, that basically meant I stopped labeling foods as good or bad. And when I did that, all food was available to me. Nothing was off limits. And let's face it, we all know this is true. When something's off limits, it only makes you want it more. So I gave myself permission to eat all foods and slowly but surely began removing the guilt and shame from the equation. So when food stopped being the enemy, I could finally focus on the real issue, and that was the root causes of my emotions. Now, the second thing I had to do to uncomplicate my emotional eating was learn to recognize my triggers. So I had to start paying attention to the moments when I reached for food emotionally. And instead of beating myself up, I got curious. And every time I felt that urge to eat, I paused and I just asked myself, what's going on right now? What am I feeling right now? What's the trigger for this feeling? What made me feel this way? What thought did I have? What circumstance was I in? And what was I really hungry for? Did I need comfort, a distraction, or just some stinking relief? And at first, it wasn't easy. Emotions can feel really messy and overwhelming. But with time, I began to see my patterns. My emotional eating was mostly driven by fear of being judged, not being good enough, and always feeling ashamed of myself because of my weight. I was so hyper vigilant about avoiding judgment of any kind. I turned into what I believe can be the most self-destructive kind of person, a high-achieving people pleaser. I climbed the career ladder to an executive level HR position. I fixed everyone's problems. I said yes to anything anyone wanted from me. I tried to be an excellent employee, a perfect mother, and a perfect wife, and it was exhausting. And the only way I got relief from the stress of my life was eating. When I was eating, especially secret eating, I didn't have to please anyone except myself. I think that's why food was my drug of choice. In the moments I was eating, I was doing something for me, and no one was going to take that one source of relief away from me. I was surviving the only way I knew how. But here's the thing I want you to know. Emotional eating isn't bad. After years of experiences, we've learned that food simply works, or we wouldn't keep turning to it. And because of that, our brain and body starts to recognize that emotional eating is the quickest, most efficient way to help you feel better. Essentially, it just becomes your primary coping mechanism. So the goal isn't always to get rid of emotional eating entirely. It's to add new ways to cope or to give yourself what you really need that doesn't always involve food. So for me, that meant experimenting with other ways to soothe myself. And sometimes it was as simple as going for a walk or journaling or calling a friend or talking to someone. Other times it was giving myself permission just to sit with the discomfort of my emotions without trying to fix them right away. And more importantly, I had to face my fear of judgment that ultimately led me to emotionally eat to begin with. Now, was it easy? No. But every time I chose a new tool, I reinforced the belief that I could handle my emotions without always relying on food. And there was one other thing I did, and this might be the most important piece. I stopped beating myself up for emotionally eating. Look, food is comforting. It's normal to want to comfort yourself when you're stressed, when you're sad or overwhelmed. And beating yourself up only adds more shame to the cycle. So instead, I started treating myself with compassion. If I turned to food, I just reminded myself that it was okay, it's normal, and I was doing the best I could in that moment. And over time, I got better and better at recognizing the difference between physical hunger and emotional hunger, and better at pausing, figuring out what that emotion was in play, and then practicing giving that emotion what it really needed. Being compassionate with myself gave me the space to ask myself what was really going on and then get to work on that. So, what looks different now? Do I still eat emotionally sometimes? Of course, I'm human, but it's no longer a battle. Emotional eating doesn't control me anymore, and that's because I've learned to address my emotions in a way that feels kind and sustainable. I can now see emotional eating for what it is, just one of the tools I sometimes use to cope, but it's not the only tool I use to cope anymore. So, if you're ready to step off the emotional eating roller coaster, here's where I recommend starting. Number one, just get curious about what's triggering your emotional eating. Notice what's going on around you when you emotionally eat. Number two, give yourself permission to eat all foods. This just takes some of the energy out of emotional eating. And number three, start building that toolbox of coping strategies, starting with just pausing before you eat and checking in with yourself and asking yourself, what am I really hungry for? And number four, be kind to yourself when you slip up. It's not the end of the world when you emotionally eat. It's actually an opportunity to get to the root cause of why. Now remember, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to fight this battle alone either. And you're absolutely capable of creating a healthier, more peaceful relationship with food and the cycle of emotional eating. So if emotional eating has been a struggle for you, I want you to know that change is possible. You're not broken, and this isn't a battle of willpower. It's about understanding your emotions, meeting your needs, and learning how to trust yourself again. And if you found this helpful, I've created a free course that goes deeper into how to stop emotional eating and start listening to your body. You'll find the link below in the description, and you can just click on it when you're ready to take that next step. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video of this series, where I'll share the third biggest change I had to make on my journey of losing 100 pounds. I'll see you there.